Andy, on OTC Monday, listeners might remember that you and JJ played the part of the soothsayer in Julius Caesar when you said, De Zerbi, beware the Ides of March. Well, the Ides of March are come, so will you take part of the blame for De Zerbi and Marseille going their separate ways?
Look, if you want to call me Brastradamus, that's up to you. I can't really have any effect on how you want to frame it. You're the man in the chair.
Tyrannosaurus breasts? No, it doesn't work.
No.
But I think what JJ and I were saying, I think is informed by years of experience of Olympique de Marseille. And we both said on Monday's pod that De Zerbi leaving was absolutely not the right thing, but will probably happen because it was going to be very, very hard for them to get over, not just defeat at Paris Saint-Germain, because that can happen and they've had enough experience of it in Le Classique in the last 14, 15 years. But the manner of it was bad. And it has been such a crazy January just for Roberto De Zerbi and Marseille. As we said, some really impressive wins in there, like the victory over Lens and the victory over Rennes in the Coupe de France. And bizarrely, with Habib Beye leaving last week, he's currently the market leader, the most likely to take over from De Zerbi, having been binned by Rennes, which didn't happen to De Zerbi. Just to clarify, it seems that it's a genuinely mutual decision because he's considered resigning on a couple of times recently. And I guess, I know you love a number, Lars, so I'm going to leave this with you. In the analysis of all the coaches of the Frank McCourt era, which is 10 years plus, Roberto De Zerbi has the highest win percentage, but he does not have the highest average point percentage, which I think is quite instructive. At a club where we generally think of them as being boom or bust, we said at the beginning, didn't we, that De Zerbi's explosiveness would match Marseille's. And even if he has become a little bit calmer in some ways, that's generally proved to be true, hasn't it?
Yeah, and I also want to say, like, that number really backs up something he said in the post-match press conference after they lost to PSG, because he said something like, I've never had a team that is such a roller coaster. Like, the full quote is funny. He's like, we lost the match in every department. Honestly, I have no explanation. It's the biggest problem at the moment. You start matches and you don't know what you're going to see on the pitch. It isn't an excuse, but we have to once again ask for forgiveness. If I had the solution to find consistency, I would take it at all costs. And they also added that it's the first time I've had such an unstable team in my career. I don't understand it. Why do we come here and play like this? And why, against Lens and Rennes, do we play completely different matches? I'm not in the players' heads. I do not know what's happening. Which is, it does kind of sum up what you were saying, is that they have under De Zerbi, there have been periods when this has been good, this is working, and then there have been just inexplicably poor performances, and he's never really been able to find the consistency to that. Also reports in the French press that the players have felt that he's been too overbearing almost, that he's been sort of monitoring them too closely in every department, that has created quite an oppressive atmosphere. Perhaps he was trying to find explanations for these very mixed performances. I don't know. My point is rather more, and what I would like to pivot towards is to say that I do think it's the sort of slightly explosive nature of De Zerbi that is part of the reason why he's gone. Because while there's been some disappointing setbacks recently, and in terms of their results, they're still fourth. I mean, they're 3 points off third. It's not what they were hoping for, but it's not like you absolutely have to sack the manager straight away territory, results-wise, I don't think. You could definitely recover from this. You could definitely knuckle down. We have months left to secure a Champions League spot in the team. There's a Champions League spot in the league. And if you can get back into the Champions League, then you can look at the squad again in the summer and see what needs trimming and what needs changing, and then go again next season. But De Zerbi just isn't, I don't think, is a coach that is really well suited to thinking that way. I think he's quite sort of all or nothing in his approach to things. And when it became clear that it wasn't going to be all, then this is the outcome we have.
Having said that, let's not forget that he wasn't sacked. So when they leave by mutual consent, Andy, do you then put that onto the 5-0 drubbing by PSG mutually on both sides, or is there more to Marseille wanting to part ways with De Zerbi, or indeed De Zerbi wanting to part ways? You said it's been hanging around for a while in wanting to leave. I wonder how much that 5-0 defeat by PSG has to do with it.
It has a lot to do with it, Dotun, but I think we need to zero in really on the emotion of it. The emotion of it for Marseille and the emotion of it for Roberto De Zerbi, because that's why they're perfectly matched and fatally flawed at the same time, really. Now, he has done a lot, I think, he's realised that. He's an intelligent man, and he's zipped his lip a bit with referees and decisions in the last couple of months, tried to get less involved in stuff upstairs that Longoria and Benatia deal with. And as JJ and I were saying, if they've fallen short of expectations in recent weeks or recent months, that's at least as much down to them as it is to the coach. But even though he's done that thing as well, he's got to a point where, for example, after this 5-0 defeat of the weekend, he didn't say anything to the players afterwards. He said, right, let's all call off and talk about it tomorrow. And he tends to do that when they've been beaten. And I think that's intelligent. That's really smart, especially in this sort of tinderbox of an atmosphere. I know it's a cliche, but it's a cliche because it's true. And yet at the same time, you can't change what you are. And I think that's been the same for coach and club, really. And it's funny, of all the, in L'Equipe, you get wonderful levels of dressing room molery, and you get some great inside talking out school chatter. One quote from an unnamed employee that I thought was really interesting is that De Zerbi leaving is at once a moment of great relief and a moment of great sadness. And I think there's a lot to be said for that. As Lars was touching on, his intensity is something else. Look, where they are at the moment, and below Lyon, a team that started the season without a proper striker, and you look at Marseille's armada of forwards, and there's really been no comparison for most of that season, that they've dropped out of the title race, which, can happen in a league with PSG, but dropped so far behind Lens and even behind Lyon is the not acceptable bit, I suppose. Even though, as Lars said, it's not as if it's unsalvageable by any stretch of the imagination. And that is on a logical level why Benatia and Longoria would have not wanted him to leave. But I guess there was maybe less appetite on both sides to live in this constant state of mania. Like we talked about, on one hand, like De Zerbi being really reasonable, knowing when to step back and take a breath. On the other hand, he tore out Amel Murillo, the right back, who was really good for them last season, in front of the whole squad, in a rant that went on for absolutely ages, way past the point where the senior players were comfortable with it, and then made sure he got sold to Besiktas. And that's not a great look. And what that does in terms of atmosphere is something that perhaps is longer lasting, even than a result of this magnitude.
Look, we'll swing back and talk about where next for Marseille. But first, Lars, what a week. It's a convenient moment at the very least to part ways mutually, and particularly if you're considering a return to the Premier League, I would have thought.
Well, it does fit very squarely into what I have perhaps selfishly branded the Lars Sivertsen ex-girlfriend theory of managerial appointments.
Not that again, not that one again.
Which is, no, but listen, just keep it in mind. With your friend, hopefully you don't deal with this a lot, because I know you both are happily married, but like with all your friends and people whose private lives are more chaotic than your own, when they split up with someone, just keep an eye on who the next partner is and compare that one to the previous one, and you will see so often whatever you felt like the previous incumbent did not have, like the next one will have a lot of. Like it never fails. It's always true. And so often this is the case in football as well. And this is on the continent, so we're not going to spend too long on it. But with Thomas Frank having been put out of everyone's misery at Tottenham, the sort of reporting on that is that one of the issues Thomas Frank had was with internal discipline, with the fact that the players didn't really connect with him, the fact that he was too defensive. And I think, again, if you're going from this sort of boring Scandinavian character who's not inspiring anyone and is a little bit too lax on the discipline and just not... You have a very fiery Latin Roberto De Zerbi, who has now, in fact, been criticized for being too overbearing and being too hands-on with the discipline. And, of course, is tactically quite interesting, but slightly unhinged. I think the overcorrection, man, it makes sense.
I can see where you're coming from now. And for those who don't know, Denmark is the Holland of Scandinavia. Yeah. In
as
more
in
ways
small
than
and
one.
flat?
Yes, indeed. But on a serious note, though, he is the bookie's favourite to take over from Thomas Frank at Tottenham, Andy. And I wonder whether, and just going back to what Lars said there, part of the problem for De Zerbi at Marseille was that he lost the dressing room, from what I understand.
At least certainly started to, I think. And the Murillo thing was a huge part of that.
Sure. How could he fit into a Tottenham setup as it is now, where they're essentially battling against relegation?
Yeah, I mean, leaning into what Lars was saying before, I think there is that thing of, going for a complete opposite. Is that short, sharp shock sort of territory, isn't it? And I guess a lot of Tottenham fans will be out there thinking that's exactly what we need at this very moment. But as well, we have to bear in mind that not only would this be a mid-season appointment, this would be an out-of-transfer window appointment. Because if you were looking at how you could make, say if there was a week of the transfer window left, and you were looking at how you could make quick fixes to Tottenham's current predicament, and obviously a few extra players given their injury list would be a thing. And you think, who would you pluck? Say, for example, let's take the transfer market rules off for a second. Who would you pluck from Marseille to be characters and make, big experience difference to them? And you'd probably think players that have played in the Premier League. You'd probably look at Aubameyang, and you'd probably look at Aguerd, and you'd probably look at Pierre-Emile Højbjerg, for goodness sakes. But it's an underlining as well as that feeling that Spurs aren't really overburdened with leaders on the field at the moment. Where are the players that would bring the sort of the sort of dynamism that De Zerbi wants? I don't see it. I think even for someone who we know who's led by his heart a lot of the time and wears his heart on his sleeve, wouldn't it be better just to take a breath and really see what's available in the summer? And if you're a good coach, if you step out of the game for a bit and you leave it for a couple of months, there's a sweet spot. You don't want to leave it as long as Pochettino stayed out of the game after leaving Spurs, because you end up taking a job that you're not really suitable for because you've been out of the game for too long. But if you leave it, say, a couple of months, people start saying, "Oh, what about that guy? He was amazing, wasn't he?" And they sort of forget all the bad bits. And I reckon if De Zerbi, Lars, were to leave it for 3-4 months, he gets his pick of a load of great Premier League jobs.
I do also think De Zerbi has in the past shown that he's not afraid to go surprising directions a little bit, or slightly surprising directions, in terms of course, he had a stint at Shakhtar. After leaving Brighton, Marseille wasn't an obvious choice for him. Like that was an intro. That was not fully left field, but it was slightly curious. There isn't. I completely agree what you're saying in that the personnel might not be entirely suited for. Again, this is where this would be an overcompensation, right? Because under Thomas Frank, Tottenham would just, it seemed like passing through the middle was entirely banned. They were just, every time Tottenham tried to create something, it was just like, knock it wide to the fullback who tried to chip it down the line to a winger. Like, there was no attempt at playing passing football whatsoever. But of course, De Zerbi is obsessed with that. He wants his teams to pass through the middle. How that would work with Tottenham's current midfielders, it would not work, I guess, would be my guess. So you probably would have to reshape the squad a little bit.
I guess I feel like Xavi Simons would click really well with him.
Yes.
I think that's the obvious thing, isn't it? Because he's coveted that number 10 all season and wanted Ethan Nwaneri to become that. Now, quite what Mikel Arteta's thinking at this moment, Lars, given that there was resistance to loaning out Nwaneri at Arsenal, and Arteta said, okay, this is going to help him. He's going to play under a coach that I have not entirely dissimilar principles from. So this is how he's going to develop. I wonder what he's thinking right now.
Yeah, I also just think building through the middle with Palhinha and Gallagher as your 2 sixes is kind of... I'd like to see him try that, but I think a fair few opponents in the Premier League would also like to see him try that. There is also this thing with... Do you know, this is a friend of mine made this reference the other day. With De Zerbi... It is like, do you know that scene from the old Adam West Batman series where Batman is kind of running around with a ticking bomb over his head and it goes on for way too long and he's trying to find a way to dispose of this bomb? It's always a little bit like that when you appoint De Zerbi is the bomb. I don't know if anyone's good with the Photoshop. You can actually have his little face on the bomb. It is a little bit like that. And you have to, if you appoint him, you have to accept that's what it is. And that's why he was passed on by all the biggest clubs after doing really impressive stuff at Brighton. The very biggest clubs looked at him and thought, nope, this guy is too unhinged. And I would have kind of thought, in terms of his career progression, what he should show, what he should demonstrate at Marseille is that he can tone that down a bit. I'm not sure it's mission accomplished in that regard. I still think his image, at least externally, is of a guy who is still too combustible, which is, again, why he probably will not get his pick of the biggest jobs in the game. But could be interesting for someone like Spurs.
Yeah, this, in case you're wondering, is OTC on the continent, and we will have enough time to reference social media memes with regards to another Italian manager in a moment. But first, Andy, where does Marseille go from here? They're not in... Are they within shouting distance of the League A title? Could they? No,
it's gone. It's gone. But what they needed to do is regroup, and what they still need to do is regroup and make sure they make the Champions League. Because there's a gap at the moment between the top 4 and the rest. But one, that could get chipped away. And 2, Marseille don't need top 4, they need top 3. Because as we clarified on Monday, top 3 automatically qualify for the Champions League. 4th has to go through the 3rd qualifying round and then the playoff round. So you have to play 4 matches to make sure you get into the Champions League proper, into the league stage. Of all the clubs that don't want that sort of uncertainty hanging over their ambitious transfer window plans, because obviously you have probably a transfer plan that is a Champions League squad and one that isn't a Champions League squad, and they're quite different budget-wise. Of all the clubs that could do without that uncertainty, I think Marseille are up there amongst the prime ones. They need the certainty of the top 3, and that affects everything from the next long-term coach to the players they get in the summer, to whether Benatia and Longoria continue, really, I suppose, as well, could be part of that. So they need to lock that down, and they need to make, even if it's a short-term appointment, whether it's Habib Bey or someone else, and of course Habib Bey is former captain of Marseille, and his job at Rennes was not completely without merit, even though he had some quite explosive relations with some players himself, which rings a few alarm bells. I think they have to make sure of that top 3, and the big thing for them is the first week of March, because first game of March they're at home to Lyon, who are a competitor for that 3rd place, and then 4 days later that they played Toulouse in the Coupe de France quarterfinals. So that is the bit now that shapes their season.
Moving on, Napoli, yes, in Serie A, have just been knocked out of the Coppa Italia, Lars, by a team called Como. It wasn't that many seasons ago that we would have said, who are they? However, it didn't go down well with the Napoli coach, Juan Antonio Conte. I think it's fair to say a very, very passionate Italian manager. So we'll come on to the social memes. How big a deal is it for you that they were knocked out on penalties, but nevertheless knocked out of the Coppa Italia by Como?
It is a shame for them because it leaves them with just the league left, and given the fact that they're not realistically probably not in the title race. I mean, it seems unfeasible that Inter will mess up to the point. I mean, they're 9 points back, so mathematically. But Inter doesn't look like a team that's suddenly going to lose 3 games out of nowhere, and Napoli doesn't look like a team that's going to win the rest of the league games. So let's say they're almost certainly out of the title race. Certainly Conte, when he was asked if they could kind of focus on the league post match, he was quite upset and suggested, Andy, that was a ludicrous question or something. Like, it was put to him, can you get yourself back in the title race now? And he was not a fan of that.
It felt like some sort of bet between journalists of like who dares to ask this question that's going to make him really angry, and then see how it goes from there. And like someone drew the short straw to do that. To say that they have an obligation to try and chase down a defence of their title now when they're 9 points behind Inter, I can understand why that would annoy Antonio Conte, especially when he already looked combustible on the touchline, as Dotun, as you referenced before. I guess the headline, or at least the internet headline from this defeat on penalties to Como, was Antonio Conte's dialogue with the fourth official, which left little to the imagination in terms of language and could possibly land him in quite a lot of trouble. So he could be in the stand for a few upcoming games. But I guess going back to what Lars was saying before, I think it's fascinating really to ask how much this really mattered. I guess some people will look at it as, well, they've lost an achievable target in the Coppa Italia to a team, Como, which is aiming to occupy the same sort of space as them in the next little while. Now, they're an outsider for the Champions League places. They're not a mile behind. They've been great at points this season. They've really progressed under Cesc Fabregas from last season as well. They're ambitious in the transfer market, bigger means than a lot of clubs that are more traditional names than them, which they generally tend to invest in young players. And so I guess some are looking and saying, well, could this be some sort of like passing of the baton? I don't think Antonio Conte is looking at it like that, because if this was a game that was, win or go home in terms of Serie A or the Champions League, I think Scott McTominay would have played. And he kind of hinted at that, didn't he? The fact that McTominay set up one and scored, well, he was involved in the first one, scored by Rasmus Højlund at Genoa at the weekend, then he scored the second one from distance. And, Conte talked about it afterwards and it fitted into his injury narrative, which, fair enough, they do have a lot of injuries. But he also said, and this was the tell really, after the Genoa game, that we'll leave McTominay out to be on the safe side against Como, sort of hinting that the fact that they're playing Roma at the weekend, the Stadio Diego Armando Maradona, and that is the more important one. That's what that suggested to me. So if the Roma game had come first and the Como game in the Coppa came afterwards, I think McTominay would have played, because he's absolutely key to Napoli, as we all know. So it's clear what the priorities are, but the way that the table looks at the moment, it's kind of like what we were talking about in the last section about it being a little bit short of what they might have hoped for, but they need to shut the back door. They need to make sure they make that top four in their case. Because it's a real competition, as we've said for a couple of weeks, and as you said last week, Dotun, one absolutely massive team, be it, or one absolutely massive club who really needs it, be it Napoli or Milan or Roma or Juventus, is going to miss out on the Champions League, and they don't want it to be them.
Having said that, Lars, the situation that Napoli are in suggests that they've got nothing to play for this season. If they're not going for the title, and they've been knocked out of all the cups that they were eligible for, including the Champions League, what else is there left for Antonio Conte to play for, or his team to play for?
Well, what there is to secure the Champions League place, which is incredibly important in terms of what you can do, the finances, and what you can do with the squad in the summer. And it comes back to exactly the thing we were talking about, De Zerbi, which is that with a normal coach, you just see, okay, we've been unlucky with injuries this season. Some things have gone against us. Let's just get to the end of the season. Let's secure the Champions League spot. Let's have a look at the squad in the summer, and then we go again. The question is whether Conte can keep his temperament in check to the point where he doesn't like randomly burn bridges when he doesn't need to. Is he the kind of character that can actually just accept, okay, this has not gone right. We need a few months to just kind of consolidate a little bit, and then we go again in the summer. This sort of rant, it's easy to think because he was quite explosive, as he often is, in defeat after this game. It's easy to see, could this be the beginning of some kind of Conte death spiral, which in fairness, I kind of thought we were in the autumn when they were really struggling. He was starting to say some pretty unhinged things, and he doesn't often turn it around when that starts happening. He kind of has. They kind of have gotten back on track. And if you read the quotes from yesterday, it's maybe not that. I mean, he does kind of praise the players he has available. He makes the point that actually we are dealing with an incredibly difficult injury situation. I don't need to list everything he says, but the point is he doesn't really turn on the players he has available to him, which makes me think that actually, okay, he was blowing off steam and he was defending himself and he was defending the position of his club and all this sort of stuff. But he does say, and this is funny, he says, what we can do is go to a shrine and pray, because these are injuries that last for the whole season, 6 or 7 players out for months at a time, blah, blah, blah. But he makes the point, I think what we are doing this season is incredibly positive in the circumstances. So I think he's not turning on the players he has. He's airing frustration about the circumstances. That means he doesn't have that many. He did fire a few shots at the club, and said something about how we have to look at the way the squad's been put together. And of course, the owners don't always love it when coaches start talking like that. But with Conte, you just kind of have to accept this is the guy you hired. And I think it's the Conte implosion watch between now and the end of the season for Napoli. Can they make the Champions League, and can Conte keep his temper in check?
Yeah, it feels unlikely to me that he would leave before the end of the season. But as you said, Conte going to Conte, and who knows if they were to have a negative result against Roma at the weekend, and in games going forward from that, and they were to find themselves in a bit of trouble in terms of reaching the Champions League, then maybe it's different. In fact, we go back to last weekend, and if Rasmus Højlund's penalty doesn't squirm over the line when the keeper should have saved it in the 95th minute at Genoa, maybe the story's a little bit different, because they're 11 points off rather than 9 points off, and they're really in the thick of a battle for that top four. Whereas at least they're in third place. They've got at least a modicum of control going into that game. But I think it normally is quite focused attacks on the recruitment department, or the president for not spending enough money, or players that he feels have let him down. Whereas his current thing, it's like he feels that it is a bit Shakespearean, Dotun. It feels like the fates are conspiring against him. The gods are conspiring against him. It's a bit old man shouting at cloud, really. And I think in that sense, I think you can have a little bit of sympathy, and you can also have the sense that the injuries, or a lot of them, will get better. I mean, obviously, you look at the penalty shootout, and where they've fallen short, the two players who missed penalties, Stanislav Lobotka, who missed a chunk of the season but is one of their most reliable players, and Romelu Lukaku, who's only just started playing after missing the whole first part of the season, or more than the first part of the season. So, then it's not ideal, as he says, but also there's a lot to recommend what they're doing. So I don't think there's a complete loss of heart and belief like we sort of underlined might have been the case at Marseille.
So it's not old man shouts at clouds as much as middle-aged man shouts at tendons. It's really that's exactly the problem here.
Yeah, well, when you drift lonely as a cloud, what do you expect? Oh, and by the way, the actual Shakespeare quote was, "I defy you, gods." And I will be
That'll be next week's press conference from Conte. I wouldn't. Actually, the dramatic... Andy said it was a dialogue he had with the referee. It seemed more like, I don't know if monologue is the right word for it. It was very one way.
Soliloquy.
Is that a soliloquy?
Yeah.
Is that what that is? It was the soliloquy. Yeah.
It was quite a sweary one. It was more Ben Jonson than Shakespeare, really.
Of course it was. Yeah. I mean, we can go even deeper than Ben Jonson as well, But I wonder to what extent, first of all, when Lars says we don't need to quote everything that Antonio Conte said, he is so quotable, though, isn't he? He's so quotable that you can't avoid it. And particularly when he does his Jose Mourinho impression, which he did do at the press conference. Let's not forget that. He reminded everybody about how many titles he had won and how many titles the other coaches had won in that Jose Mourinho style. I mean, what's there not to love about Antonio Conte?
I guess Mourinho is just sitting at home watching that on TV at home in Portugal going, yeah, still got it, still quotable.
No, he's probably thinking, you nicked that quote off me, Did we get the translation correctly when he allegedly describes the fourth official as a dickhead? Was that lost in translation, or was that a literal...
No. I mean, I always think it's less about the words than the concepts outlined, really. And there was worse than that. He'll be in a lot of trouble.
But you would expect to see this as a social meme, Antonio Conte berating the fourth official.
Well, I don't think we're short of those anyway, really, are we?
It's a little bit more dog bites man than man bites dog, that thing. I mean, I think this is more... It'll be at the point where maybe it becomes a meme if he doesn't. Like, if he just politely applauds the referee and goes, see, well done. That would be worth being... That could be a meme.
Yeah, I'm not here to teach you guys journalism, but what Lars has just done is give you lesson 1 in journalism. Dog bites man, no story. Man bites dog, front page news, as we can see from our morning papers. Let's move on to talk about the Portuguese Liga. There, at least, the title race is back on, Andy. Back on!
Yeah, but kept alive by a whisker. For Porto were leading Sporting 1-0 in the Clásico on Monday night, which would have sent them back 7 points clear. And then... right at the end, deep into stoppage time, Sporting get a penalty. Luis Suarez, who has been on an incredible tear in recent months, has his penalty saved by Diogo Costa, follows it up to put it in. That's in the 10th minute of stoppage time, virtually the last kick of the game. And it helps Sporting get a point, which keeps the gap at the top to 4 points, just a 4-point advantage for Porto. It was a game that it wasn't a classic, but at the same time had like a meaning in every moment. It was really absorbing because it was clear how much it meant to both teams. Now, Sporting, and especially Rui Borges, their coach, and Luis Suarez as well after he scored his goal, were very keen to say that they'd been the superior team and they should have won it. But Diogo Costa didn't have loads to do. Sporting were maybe a little bit more positive, which really reflected the fact that they needed try and make up that gap, and it was a good opportunity to do so. But on the other hand, it didn't feel to me that either of the teams was prepared to go all in to win the game, and that really defined it. But yeah, the Suarez equaliser was not just huge for Sporting, but huge for the league and for the title race, because 7-point gaps in February in Portugal just do not get made up.
And I suppose, Lars, Benfica will be rubbing their hands with glee and thanking Sporting for their endeavours.
Yeah, I mean, they are still 7 points back from Porto, but it maybe opens the door a tiny bit. But the problem is, Porto are not. I mean, they've lost one game all year. They've conceded 7 goals in 21, Porto. They're just not conceding goals at all. And which maybe casual observers or even non-observers of the Portuguese league will be surprised to learn, given that their centre-half pairing is comprised of Jan Bednarek and Jakub Kivior. That seems like that you'd expect Southampton to get relegated with those two at the back or something like that. But that seems to be working extremely well, Andy.
Yeah, and what they've done is they've sort of gone more defensive in recent weeks since Thiago Silva's come in. He's partnered Bednarek and they've shoved Kivior out to left back. He's not an attacking left back. Let's be quite clear about that. So the direction in which they've been going is quite clear. And I guess the interesting thing is, with their being a sort of glimmer of a title race, because sort of 4 is still a decent gap for Porto. I guess there are 2 big questions coming out of this. Firstly, that they've not won for 2 games because they lost the last one at Casa Pia. So of those 7 goals that they've conceded, 3 of them have been in the last 2 games. And the question is, we haven't seen Francesco Farioli, who's done a brilliant job there so far this season, actually get a title over the line. We saw him do very, very worthy work at Ajax, but he couldn't quite take them there to the finishing post. So can he do that? And I guess the other question is, coming out of this game, Samu, the Porto centre forward, picking up that ACL injury that keeps him out of the rest of the season, keeps him out of the World Cup for Spain. How do they recover from that, especially out of transfer window?
Yeah, because that's the big thing that I was going to actually bat straight back to you, Andy. So this is going to be something of a 1-2 here. But like, their defensive record, 7 goals conceded in 21 is incredible. But they have just scored 42, which means actually Braga in 4th have scored more goals than them. And if you look at where the goals are coming from, 13 in the league have been scored by Samu, and the second top goal scorer is Borja Saiz with 5. And if you look at who the back is, Samu out for the season now. Is it Dennis Goul? Is he going to come in and do it? He's had many substitute appearances. Luke de Jong is still knocking around. Are we looking to 35-year-old Luke de Jong to get them across the line, Andy?
So De Jong's not fit, which is an issue for them, because he would have been a great backup, and we know that he can score goals on a weekly basis. And of course, he scored big goals if we go back some years to Sevilla and Barcelona, even if he wasn't relentlessly consistent. I feel he could have done a good job for them, but that's why they brought in Terem Moffi from Nice. I think the question about him, Moffi has always had quality. In a golden era for Nigerian strikers, he would have been up there up until the last couple of years when he had that major injury himself. Then, of course, he left Nice under really difficult circumstances after he was one of the players, along with Jeremy Boga, attacked by supporters when they were on that terrible run. I guess the question is, how quickly can they get Moffi properly fit? Because if they get Moffi properly fit, he's the pick instead of Goul. There's no question about that. Goul is a useful squad player, but I would say no more. He's nowhere close to Samu, whereas the best version of Terem Moffi can be. So how quickly they can get him fit is a question. Of course, the other signing they made in the January transfer window, or the other big signing that they made in the January transfer window, had a big impact on this. Seko Fofana comes off the bench. we know he's got great technical quality, and he's got great strength as well. He scored the goal that put them in front after coming off the bench. And if we're talking about sources where goals will come from, if Fofana can get like somewhere between 6 and 8 towards the end of the season, and I wouldn't rule that out at all. I think he'll have a great time there because he's a very, very good player, and maybe a little bit different to what they already have in terms of his technical ability and goal scoring threat and directness. Then they'll be in business, I think.
Can I throw something into the mix?
Please.
Thiago Silva, center forward. Make it happen. Make it happen. He's 41, but, he was always a good goal scorer. I mean, he strikes the ball well. Yeah, he strikes the ball well. He's got power for the last 10 minutes of games. Bring him on.
It's a done deal. But I'm surprised that the Portuguese Liga, though, Andy, still allow ball boys to have an effect on the outcome of a game.
Yeah, I don't think they do. Of course, there's significant fallout from this, as there always is from every Classico, especially when, the title's at stake. And really, it feels like the post-game has gone on longer than the game itself and will continue to do so. So Sporting complained about a number of what they see are beyond gamesmanship issues with Porto. The main one was obviously in the multi-ball system, you have cones with a ball on around the pitch, so the game can be got on with quickly when the ball goes out of play. Now, those cones were all taken up towards the end of the game, and the balls were put behind the advertising hoardings, so Sporting couldn't get on with it quickly, which Sporting are furious about, and quite rightly. Some of their other complaints, like the air conditioning was on too high in the changing room. Porto had newspaper headlines of their great triumphs over the urinals in the dressing room. By the way, Porto said they decorated in September and it wasn't put up specifically for this Classico. But this is the sort of pettiness that we're looking at on either side, really. Porto put in a complaint about Morten Hjulmand, the captain of Sporting, and his behaviour in a previous game as a counter to that, which wasn't a game that they were involved in, by the way. But it's not the first time that Andre Villas-Boas era Porto have been accused of gamesmanship. Of course, there was a referee earlier in the season who said that there was a compendium from the club's in-house TV channel of his decisions that had gone against Porto and Porto's B team in earlier games that were put on a telly in his dressing room, and he couldn't turn the telly off for some reason, which Porto said was due to some technical defects, but I don't really know who believes that. But ball boys, they'll never not be important in the game, Lars.
Do you know who was the real winner of this game? I think we can all agree. We have neither team getting 3 points, Porto losing their star striker. In the south of the country, somewhere in front of a log fire, sipping a cognac or something, I think Jose Mourinho was laughing like a hyena.
He's got to be there. He's got to be there. And that's what we talked about Benfica earlier on. Now, okay, this is what we're like on OTC. We bring you all the quirkiest bits of football in Europe as well. Who would have known all of those issues with regards to ball boys if it wasn't for you tuning in? And we ain't done yet. We've got a game of the week recap. So what we'll do tomorrow on Ask OTC is ask both Lars and Andy to recommend a game of the week for us to all enjoy this weekend. Last week's recommendations were made by Andy and Miguel Delaney. Now, I wonder if we could reflect on those for just a moment. Andy, you picked Bayern Munich against Hoffenheim, and that was a goal fest, was it?
Yeah, there was, but it was quite disappointing in the end. So it was first versus third. As we know, Bayern had taken 1 point from the previous two. Borussia Dortmund had won at Wolfsburg on the Saturday to close the gap at the top to 3 points. And so you thought Hoffenheim, having an incredible overachieving season, go there in third place on a run of 5 successive wins, maybe they could make something happen. Of course, they got a player sent off after 17 minutes. Kevin Akpaguma's challenge that led to a penalty, which was taken and scored by Harry Kane. So it ended up 5-1 to Bayern, which we were hoping for a bit more back and forth. The first half was interesting, but as soon as Akpaguma went, you knew that Hoffenheim weren't going the distance. So a little bit disappointing in those terms.
Whereas Miguel picked the game we've been talking about earlier on and asked Code CC. He picked the right one though, didn't he, Lars?
Yeah, good choice, but not much to add. You've had one Reacts episode on it, and we had a segment mostly on it. I mean, but you have to say, from PSG's point of view, if you beat your arch rivals in the league, your domestic arch rivals, you beat them so badly the manager leaves, then that is a job well done for that derby, I think.
I think the other thing we have to say is they're talking of the fallout as we were from the Classico between Porto and Sporting, is the footage that, funnily enough, Ligue 1 Plus, the French league's direct-to-consumer channel released, and it's of Dembele standing, Ousmane Dembele, who had an amazing game, as we were saying on Monday, stood next to Pierre-Emile Højbjerg going, Balerdi, he's rubbish. Come on. you know he is. And Højbjerg's just standing there saying nothing. Going, well, this is awkward.
Will they never learn? So that was last week's choices. PSG 5, Marseille 0, Bayern Munich 5, Hoffenheim 1. I suppose you can conclude from those results that these Game of the Week recommendations are well worth taking a note of.